Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Secret Sunday session. Today I'm joined by Mike Willing. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Ashley, lovely to be with you.
It's a pleasure to have you on to start this conversation around your story, your career, and what that looks like in terms of how it's impacted you, as well as what people I think can take away from having an alternate perspective that we don't often get from people that were and still are working in senior positions, especially when you were working in the public sector. But I'm going to talk no more because I think it's best coming from you to explain who you are, what you're doing, and why you believe it's important that you share your story on the podcast.
Well, thank you again so much for the opportunity of being on the Secret Sunday podcast series. It's such a privilege, Ashley. But Mick Willing, born and bred in Dubbo, New South Wales, spent nearly 32 years with New South Wales Police, finished as a Deputy Police Commissioner, did a little bit of private sector work, but am now the CEO of Fortem Australia. So a not-for-profit that has been around for about 5 years and supports first responders and first responder families, plus national security personnel's families as well, with wellbeing, resilience building activities, clinical support and career management processes. So it's a real privilege to be the CEO of that. And I guess my journey within and outside of policing led me to really want to give back and help first responders who experience, all sorts of different things. They are our unsung heroes in many, many ways. So I love giving back and I'm enjoying what I'm doing.
Phenomenal. It's incredible work, heavy work, I would imagine. And as much as I really want to dive into what you're doing now, our stories all start somewhere. And I know with the background of your story, it hasn't been easy, and you've really been put in the public eye when you were working in the public sector. But before we dive into all the controversies that did come from that, you decided to work in such, as I said, a heavy industry, an industry that was about, well, initially is what we all believe, is giving back to the people and protecting the people and helping the people. Why? Why choose to work in such an industry?
I think that some people are just innately wired that way. When I left school, I wanted to be one of two things: an archaeologist or a detective. I actually went down the first path, university for a little bit, but I always just had this desire to be a detective, and I wanted to serve and do it. And as I decided to leave university and go to the New South Wales Police, I was very young. But, when you get into those sort of occupations, I think it becomes a calling. Like back then, it wasn't a job. It was actually something that you knew you were going to dedicate your whole life to. And that, I'm not saying that is any different now for many people, but it seems much more transactional for some people at the moment, but or in recent times. But it's almost a calling. And it's just something that is deeply ingrained in people like me and many others. And I think, the key phrase is purpose. The key word is purpose. And serving a community in a first responder type role gives you deep purpose. And it's something that you deeply miss when you're not doing it, to be honest.
And when you got to where you wanted to be in the industry, once you first started, did it meet that expectation?
Oh, yeah. It evolves and grows over time. So I started, in general duties policing for a couple of years, became a detective, worked in, some amazing places, homicide, New South Wales Crime Commission. I went back home to Dubbo for a while and was, promoted up the ranks. Ultimately was what was then a local area commander, so superintendent, with responsibility for geographical areas. And that's really important work because you are in control of providing a policing service to keep people safe and hopefully feel safe at the same time. And it's the responsibility of that is very deep. I ended up at homicide as the boss of the New South Wales Homicide Squad for 6 years, and I can tell you actually what a privilege to have that role. One of the most high profile roles in the country when it comes to media, but you are literally working with a team of people who speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves, and providing answers where you can to families that are left behind in the most tragic circumstances. So that purpose, there's no deeper purpose than being a homicide detective and or the privilege of leading a homicide squad. I went to counterterrorism as an assistant commissioner and ran counterterrorism for a couple of years, engaging with international agencies, completely different way of operating, but equally high profile in many ways, but great relationships across the Five Eyes countries and dealing with very real threats at the time. Served as a Central Metropolitan Region Commander, so all of those high profile protests and those things which are controversial, you're entrusted with policing those, and that brings with itself some challenges. And finished as a Deputy Commissioner with responsibility for all of regional New South Wales and a few other areas as well, and about almost 6,000, a workforce of almost 6,000. So, I led bushfire recovery for New South Wales as well. I was selected by the Premier to lead that at the time, which was such a privilege, working with people from other government agencies and the military, trying to literally get the state back up on its feet from our biggest natural disaster that we've ever faced. And then rolled into COVID and was part of, crisis cabinet, at various points, and those challenging 11 a.m. press conferences that everyone looked at every day.
They were the highlight of my year during that time.
They were for many people, certainly for me and the poor, Premier and others at the time, the most intense press conferences you can ever participate in, but the most important. So all of that, I guess, the purpose and giving back and seeing the results when you can impact on the community was really important. And ultimately, at the end of the day, did I achieve the purpose I was seeking? Yes, absolutely. And I miss it deeply in many ways. So,
Did you ever lose that purpose during the position?
I don't think I ever lost it, but there were certainly times throughout my policing career where, events happened, and I felt disillusioned. I felt, I felt I wasn't happy with what was happening around me. Some of them were very personal, like, close friends who took their own lives, who were police officers. And, I remember, the first time that happened, my partner took his own life in 1995, and, he was a well-known local detective in the inner west, and I just felt lost. I was only young, and so I kind of dedicated myself. Ultimately dedicated myself into in doing exercising and those sort of things. As a bit of an outlet type thing. So but then you re-engage in many ways, and every career's got ups and downs as you go through it. Various points too. Like all of us. I wasn't happy with the leadership I saw. I wasn't happy with the way that that I was leading people, and I was learning a lot about the power of connecting with people and being as good a leader as you can by being authentic and empathetic and those things. And sometimes I wasn't happy with myself in the job. So and other times you're exhilarated, with the opportunities that come your way, and then those special moments that are really, really important when something works or something happens, or you can do something that's really meaningful for people. That's where it all pays off in the end as well.
Did you ever feel not well equipped to pursue the job that you were in?
Every day. Every day. And I say that from the context of, like most people, I suffered from imposter syndrome. I suffered from, and probably still do, occasionally a lack of confidence. Like it's easy to have a veneer of confidence and those things, but we all question ourselves, and well, you should, and we all, sometimes reflect and go, am I really up to this job? Sooner or later, someone's going to, peel back the onion layer and recognize that I really shouldn't be in this job. But, and I think every leader experiences that, or they should, and those that don't say it, are lying. And so I think every day, I question whether I've got the intellect, the drive, the capacity to actually do the roles that I was doing. But ultimately, it seems that I didn't do too bad. So
It is. It's really interesting, I think, when people say if we use the 11 a.m. press conference for New South Wales during the COVID times, and when we look at that, and I remember myself watching those interviews thinking how strong of a front we have in terms of the way that was delivered and the way you guys stepped forward and you said the statistics and you said what was happening, and a country, a state, a community had so much belief and trust
mm,
in our leaders. With we criticized, don't worry, we had that, but there was still this innate trust in the fact that you guys knew what you were doing and we had to trust that. And I think it's really important then for you to share that vulnerability of you didn't know as well.
oh yeah, look, I'm a big believer in trust in policing, right? So, the Pelian principles of policing were, written in 1829, by Sir Robert Peel or somebody close to Sir Robert Peel, which really set the foundations for modern policing in the Westminster system. So, England, Australia, and New Zealand, etc. And those principles are based on trust, and you can't police or govern, I'll put it that way, a community without the community's trust and consent. And that trust is really fragile, in my view, and you need to constantly work at it. And COVID really strained the trust that the community had on not just policing, but probably government as a whole and those things. But I can tell you, actually, sitting in some of those meetings and, there's cabinet and confidence discussions and things, but everyone around those tables or everyone on those virtual calls that I participated in had the best interests of the community and the state and indeed the country at heart. That was a situation where information was coming in globally that was absolutely shocking. And, the decisions that were taken at the time, putting aside partisan politics, I thought were remarkable given the pressure and the constant pressure that the Premier, Deputy Premier and other ministers, etc., and public sector, public servants were under at the time. And they were doing the best they could. Now, I know that, hindsight, now we look back and go, well, we did this wrong and that, all those things, right, which come later on. But you know what? A lot of the commentary around what happened in COVID it comes from people who didn't walk in the shoes of the leaders who had to make those decisions. And, that's a burden that comes with leadership, in my view. And yes, standing up and instilling confidence in a press conference is integral to leadership. You have to be able to stand up and instill a level of confidence in the community that those that are entrusted with, carrying out particular roles or doing things, protecting the community or doing the best things in the interest of the community, understand and know what they're doing. I see it far too often now where there are leaders who don't instill that confidence and or authenticity. And I think Australians really, really, it's ingrained in them to love their leaders who are authentic and actually stand up and tell the truth and speak it the way it is.
Mm. At that time, obviously, it was quite an uneasy time. As you said, there was a lot of different opinions being thrown around, and it almost did feel like public against government. And that was sort of the way
Yeah.
it was because people didn't like the way that, restrictions were put in place. Were
Yep.
you proud of the leader you were at that time?
Yeah, so the role of a policing leader is to implement government policy. And, you may agree with it, you may disagree with it. I agree with different policy settings and I disagree with different policy settings. But, ultimately being a professional, you have to do it. And I'll give you an example, right? Where I came back from leading bushfire recovery right in the middle of to Central Metropolitan Region as the Assistant Commissioner, right on the back of what happened with George Floyd in the United States, and obviously triggered massive Black Lives Matter protests. At the time, the first big protest in Sydney, I was responsible for policing that, and we had a situation where a health order, a law, said that only 30 people could congregate in an area at one time. 30,000 wanted to protest. How do you deal with that, right? And I remember driving into that policing operation that day, and I was physically sick in the car, like just going, because the consequences of having to enforce the law with public order police, 650 I put on the street to deal with that, were sickening, because it was an emotive issue that I had my own opinion about, and many of the police officers who fronted up that day and subsequent days to police that issue had their own personal views on, and so the way that I think the officers handled that, by and large, was remarkable. Ultimately, what happened, the Supreme Court of Appeal came back and after some court action and authorised the protest. And so pretty quickly, we were able to pivot and facilitate 30,000 people protesting, which was great. They're difficult things to do, I can tell you. But so in terms of a leader, I remember going and talking to the troops beforehand and saying, something along the lines of, we all have our views on these issues, but, I need you to be professional, and I need you to put those views aside and do your jobs. And they did. And so from a leadership perspective, yes, I was proud on many occasions with the way that I led, but I also think that the whole leadership thing is, it's not a static thing. You grow and evolve over time, and and you need to be adaptable in the way that you lead. I was really proud of the way that I and others led our bushfire recovery, because it was completely different from what anything I'd ever experienced, and actually anything anyone had ever experienced. But I had a wonderful cohort of deputy secretaries and executive directors and brigadier generals and all that sort of stuff, who were part of the team that we confronted everything from literally keeping people alive in the first few days through to long-term economic recovery. And so I'm proud of all of those things. But no leader can lead without good people around you, and I've been really lucky my entire career to have teams around me who are great, and who aren't afraid to call you out for your weaknesses as well, and I really like that. So
It must be so difficult, and that's where I want to ask is that really challenging to the point where you have this ongoing conflict between what you personally believe, but knowing then you have to pursue a job? Like, how do you put that aside and know that the job comes first?
Quite simply, you have to compartmentalize it. Otherwise, really, you can't let your emotions or views, as hard as it is, impact on you professionally doing your job. And it's such a hard thing to do. And I defy anyone, who thinks that they can just, all of a sudden do this, and, this might be controversial, but, our judiciary allegedly can do it. No, they can't. At the end of the day, they're human beings, and it's difficult, but, what the judiciary do well is they compartmentalise it, and they focus on the processes and the role and their obligations that they have to fulfill. And I think it's very difficult. And I'm not making excuses, but sometimes you see emotions take over, and police officers and first responders, do silly things. And in hindsight, I'm sure that some of them look back and go, "Wow, I wish I didn't let that emotion get to me, or my feeling get to me that way." And they pay a heavy price for that, but compartmentalizing and just sticking to the processes and the things that your job and the structures and guidelines that you're working within is the key to it, I think.
Does it eventually take its toll mentally?
Yeah, I think so. I think, there is certainly. I was talking to somebody today about a family member of a former first responder about the journey that family, I'll just put it that way, went through, and the term moral injury came up during our discussion a lot. And it's quite. I think that we are at risk of that sometimes. Particularly when you see things or you feel things are unethical and those things, and I do believe that, you need to follow your gut and you need to speak up when you think something's wrong. You have to be able to do that. But yes, I think there is a toll to be taken in terms of an injury that occurs to your emotions by doing things that don't sit with your values, I guess, put it that way. And of course, there's a psychological impact, let alone and a physical impact and those things as well. I've seen many police officers over the years, close friends of mine, and where their glass is full, and it happens in different ways to different people. And if I look back on my career, there were many times where I probably should have thrown my hand up and gone and seen someone and talked about, particular issues. And I didn't. And, when I left policing, I ended up doing that. And I'm very proud that I did that, to be honest. And, I think dealing with the burdens that come with it, rather than sort of putting them aside, yes, it goes against the compartmentalization coping mechanism I mentioned, but dealing with it's a sign of strength. To be honest.
Yeah, and it's hard, I think, when we have these conversations often to, talk about it, come home and share to your loved ones. But in the work that you're doing, it's also very heavy and that's hard. And a lot of people say, you got to leave your shit at the door and you don't want to put that on your family. And you also don't think your family may understand what you're going through.
Oh, totally. I mean, no one, in my experience, wants to go home and, bring your shit home. And many times I think that I would, particularly, I think I was present, but not present. Now you read that, it's almost like a cliche experience for people sometimes. And particularly in the high profile roles where, you're like 24/7 going. Yeah, you get calls in the middle of the night to make decisions, life or death decisions around, say, sieges, authorizing actions and things like that, which, potentially would put lives at risk and all those things, right? You just wake up in the middle of the night and get briefed to make decisions. Your family sort of hears the phone call, yes, they may get a little bit used to it in some ways, but I think ultimately it takes a bit of a toll on everyone around you. And that's why I think, the current role that I'm doing in the current organisation that I'm working with, because it provides support to first responder families, that's such a critical piece of the puzzle that needs to be addressed, much more thoughtfully by governments around this country, I think. So, but it's hard. It is very hard.
Oh, I would imagine, and as I said, the toll that it takes on the people around you that also are not fully understanding what's going on through their loved ones' heads and how they're able to process that. And when you just have to
Yeah.
leave that hat at the door, like it's so hard.
Yeah. And, I think, I look back now and, I you do it with all the best interests, with all the best intentions. You focus on your job and all those different things. But I wish I did it a little bit differently. But it was so hard not to be so engrossed in what you're doing. One of my closest friends is a deputy commissioner in a law enforcement agency in this country. I'll just put it that way. And him and I were talking about this issue, and he said to me something which I've always sort of thought about. He goes, "Mick, we didn't do it right back then." And he said, "We always just said, oh, but my job's so important. My job's so important. I have to do this. I have to do this." You just don't appreciate the consequences of those around you. You understand it, but you don't appreciate it. And the long-term sort of consequences of those around you who, you know, care for you, they're proud of you, all those things, but they can probably see that it's hurting you at the same time. So,
Do you feel when you are dealing with these heavy roles and having to make these big decisions, whether it be, bushfire relief or, as you said, the protesting or going through COVID, that your family missed a piece of you during that time?
yeah, I think so. I think so. Um, I remember early on when I went to say the homicide squad, like it didn't take too long for me to sort of come home and go, oh, Dad's on TV tonight, because I've got two daughters, and it didn't take them too long to go, like, yeah, who cares? I
Mm.
just it was so probably different for them in many ways, but I always saw myself as having a public persona and a private persona. And I tried hard to, make the private persona being, tick all the boxes and be there and those sort of things. But, it's very hard to have a work-life balance in some of those roles. And so, um, yeah, I think that they did miss a piece of me. Certainly, there were occasions, as I said, where I was physically present, but I've got the iPad open or the iPhone or back before the BlackBerry and the red dots flashing away, and I always had some work going at the same time. Even on the breakfast bench, I'd have something happening on a laptop, whatever, and all those things, and you're trying to pay attention to what's important and those that your loved ones around you, but you just are constantly sucked into work.
Mm.
So
If
yeah.
work was your purpose and what you loved and why you started to do it and obviously as you said there was that piece there where you didn't feel as present as you could have been during that time, would you have
Mm.
done it any differently?
That's a really, really good question, actually. You know, my my heart says I would have liked to have. My brain says I probably couldn't have. It's yeah, like that leads to feelings I think lots of first responders probably have around wanting and needing to be understood, because they're probably like please understand what I'm going through was probably something which was constant in my thinking throughout the time, and and sometimes feeling that people didn't understand me because I couldn't tell them exactly what was happening. I couldn't tell them around about some of the things that that you're dealing with, not just decisions, but some of the most emotional events and things that you're trying to lead people through, and the impact of lots and lots of different things over the course of many years. So I always sort of wanted to be understood,
Mm.
and yeah, and most importantly by those loved ones around me.
Mm.
So
And
yeah,
if during that time you were able to articulate that to them, what did you want them to understand?
like I wanted them to understand that that Mick, Michael, Dad, husband, is a good person, who's doing an extraordinary job, under difficult circumstances, and probably um, understand that, you act the way you do, or, you might be short-tempered, whatever it is, you might do something, um, but you are carrying so much inside you, and so much that you're dealing with. It's sort of, that if I said, "Oh, that's not who Dad is or who Michael is," probably not right. That's not the right term, but a little like I wanted them to understand that the burden that comes with some of these roles is significant, and almost requires a deeper level of caring, almost, and understanding. So yeah, I've never been asked that before, to be honest. And it's a very deep question, but and a very deep issue. And I think lots and lots of first responders, if not the vast majority, struggle with that.
Mm. Yeah, I think about it a lot in terms of even the work that I do because I think it comes down to choice. I mean, and in the terms of your priorities and I think that's the real conflict almost because you have this purpose and you have this drive and you want to do your job, but your job is so demanding and asks so much of your time and you also don't want to give it up, but then you also don't want the people that you love to miss out on having and sharing those amazing opportunities with you. So sometimes it's like you don't know how to say it to people because you don't want to let them down whilst you're also trying to pursue something that gives you so much passion and drive inside.
And it becomes who you are as a
Your
human
identity.
being. And it's who you are, it's your identity, as you just said. And you want your family and those around you to be part of that identity and to be there alongside you. But you also know deep down that, sometimes they can't because you can't communicate with them around what's happening. And sometimes, it's not fair on them to be pulled into that world too. But you want your cake and to eat it as well, and so it's very difficult. And those that get the balance right, and I hope that there are many first responders out there who do get the balance right. Um, that's remarkable. It's almost nirvana
Mm.
in many ways,
Please share.
And yeah, please share. I wish I knew, like in saying that, wonderful experiences and connections with my family and those sort of things, my daughters and things like that. But it was always a burden. It was always something that I carried. And yes, it's about choices, absolutely. But in some of these leadership positions, and certainly for me, I always felt that I was on a train I couldn't get off in some ways because one thing led to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and I guess people pursue that and ambition drives that in lots of people. Um, I've been accused by people of being ambitious. The reality is those around me who deeply know me know that yeah, I have an ambition like everyone else always had, but it was almost like an inevitability with some of the roles I had that I'd go on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So I guess I could have jumped off that train at some point, but it didn't happen
Mm.
until the end. So,
It's funny listening to you speak about that and the ambition that you say that drove you and then that conflict within yourself between family and work. Did you ever sit in guilt and shame for that? And did you ever deal with it?
guilt, yes. Shame, probably not, but guilt, yes. And I'm lucky. I've got a strong network around me, strong friends who are in law enforcement and those sort of areas too. And cops talk to cops, right? Nurses talk to nurses, and that again a cliche type thing. Downloading and being able to do that, with close work colleagues is very important. It's an important and strong part of culture in some of the agencies. Culture is not a bad term when it comes to first responder agencies, and I've heard it, bad culture and all these sayings and all that stuff. You need your colleagues around you. You need to be able to talk about things. So yeah, I felt guilty, and I downloaded to various people around me who were going through probably the same sorts of things. Shame, no, because I was never shamed of what I was doing in as a police officer. I was proud of it. But yeah, guilty. Certainly in hindsight, certain situations, I went, geez, I wish I could have handled that better. I wish I could have dealt with that situation at home better, or I wish I could have, been more caring in that situation, or, spent that extra time doing X, Y, Z, with loved ones, that sort of stuff. Absolutely.
Mm. Which then brings me into the last area of your public sector career, that was controversial, and I feel that with the decision that was made around your role would bring, I would imagine, so much up for you. Talk me
Mm.
through that period of time and talk me through how, firstly, what happened for those people that are not aware of what happened, and
Yep.
how you were able to get through that period, staying true to who you are and not holding, you may have held a lot of anger, but learning
Mm.
to let go of that and move on, knowing that, as you said, this became your identity, and then overnight that was stripped away.
Yeah. Literally within 30 minutes. Late 2021, I participated in a process to select the police commissioner to replace Commissioner Mick Fuller. Look, I had been fortunate enough and to be almost groomed, by processes, people. I had great mentors in government, outside of government. Certainly, the investment that Commissioner Fuller and others made in me was just humbling and remarkable, and I will always be thankful. But I wasn't the only one. There were others that had I guess, a pathway towards potentially becoming the police commissioner. So we went through a process, a number of us. Ultimately, there were three people that were interviewed for the police commissioner's role. Um, uh, I was the preferred applicant as a result of the process. How do I know that? Because the convener of the panel rang me and said, "We're going to go to your referees. You're the preferred applicant. This goes to government now." Look, at the time, it was a bit of a tumultuous time in government because one premier left, resigned, another premier came in, and the whole process almost sort of stopped. And you know, the three of us that were interviewed, were re-interviewed by the new premier in some ways when it was actually a conversation, and yeah, we were waiting, and it was having been identified as the preferred applicant. I was obviously very hopeful that things would work out. Ultimately, after a long period of time, the new premier that came in chose somebody else, another one of the three of us, as is that premier's right. And whilst that was disappointing for me, I was 49 years old, young enough to have two or three cracks if I wanted to again. And I really, for the first time, I guess I stepped off the train, and I thought, okay, I just want to get on with my role. And being a country boy, I wanted to really give back to regional New South Wales because I understood it. I understood the challenges, certainly the crime challenges and social challenges. And then the incoming commissioner, I took a couple of weeks off, and I went on the second week for a few days up the coast with a couple of close policing colleagues of mine, just to do what boys do, drink beers and tell silly stories to each other. And at 5 o'clock one afternoon, I received a phone call from the incoming commissioner who told me that she had terminated my contract. As of then and there. Now, in fairness to the incoming commissioner, who's now the commissioner, I won't compromise and talk about the content of that conversation, other than to say that, my career ended then and there. And it was shocking. Now, every CEO or leader of an organization, in my view, can pick their team, and I have no problem with that. It is absolutely integral that leaders are able to, where possible, pick their team around them. And so I've never to this day had a problem with that. It had never been done like that before, and the shockwaves that occurred were pretty monumental throughout policing, not just New South Wales Police, but across the country, to be honest. Because I was known to police leadership across the country, I'd led, some amazing teams throughout the course of my career. And, within 30 minutes of that phone call, I had no emails. A person had been, who was relieving me as a deputy commissioner at the time, had been sent up to drive, 4 hours north of Sydney to be there, waiting outside. a wonderful human being who's still an assistant commissioner within New South Wales Police. And I'll never forget the look on his face. He just said, "Boss, I don't even know what to say." And it was a shocking moment because it felt it was a shocking personal moment for obvious reasons for me. Lucky I had great people around me. And I'm asked the question sometimes, oh, but that's what you're in, that environment at that level. Yeah, you are. And did I ever anticipate it happening? Probably not, but I knew that those things happen, at that level. But it didn't take away the hurt and the pain. And then, wow, the number of messages that I got in the ensuing days was so humbling, from every type of medium, from people that I knew and I didn't know, constables, people, community members, 1,200 probably, maybe more, maybe less. Unbelievable. It was so humbling. But I got to say, I was in shock. And of course, it was very public. You're on the front page of the paper. Some of the narrative was absolutely correct. As usual, some of the narrative was absolute bullshit, and I was very angry about a couple of pieces of the narrative that had been, were being pushed out there because it's a viper's nest of politics in some of these roles. And I wasn't happy at all about some of the messages that were coming out about why and what had happened. And of course, I didn't want to say anything, and so people filled the gap with their own rumor and innuendo. But a couple of things I did really early on, I'm glad I did. One was through a very senior person who was a leader in ASIO. Connected me with a wonderful CEO transition coach, and who worked with me for a long time to sort of work out who am I and what do I want to do next, and what is it that makes me tick every day. And so that person is somebody I still work with to this day, on and off, and she's a remarkable person, has worked with a number of high-profile people in various areas. So I'm glad I did that. The second thing I'm glad I did was I reached out and I was engaged with a top psychologist, with a PhD who understood policing, deeply understood policing, and worked with her to deal with the, I guess, the hurt, the loss of identity, the anger's too strong a term. I've never really been angry about it. I've always been, disappointed by it. And I always thought that the way that it was handled probably caused more problems at the end of the day for, the decision makers involved in that than they probably anticipated. And I thought, really, this is going to impact on you and others involved in those decisions far longer than it will on me in many ways. And I think that's probably played out in many ways, because I still have significant support across policing in this country, and I'm really humbled by that. And so, I reached out and, for a period of time, got it off my chest, and it was great to be told, what you're feeling and experiencing is normal. And it made me go, wow, geez, I wish I did this earlier. Geez, I wish I had somebody who could listen in an informed, educated way to be able to go, it's okay. It's okay. And so, that person as well, on and off, I've spoken to that person, a number of times over the last 3 years, when confronted with different things have occurred. And, the both of them are wonderful ladies, wonderful people who are very maternal to me, and I'm very grateful for that. And so, but it was hard. found myself, because I had joined policing after 1988, I didn't have a pension. So the superannuation scheme that I was in, I didn't have a pension at all. And a lot of people assume that I did. Oh, Mick will be right. He's got a pension. He'll go. I didn't. I had my entitlements that were given to me, and they were ticking away every day. And I was thinking to myself, well, how do I put my girls through university? How do I support my family? What do I do? Who am I? And so I had, again, a wonderful network of people, and some very prominent people who to this day are just amazing. And I was very close with signing with one of the big four consultancies as a partner. Very close. When my transition coach said to me, "Have you thought of Accenture?" And I said, "Oh, they're those tech people, aren't they? A global consultancy of 700,000 people." And ultimately, within a couple of weeks after being connected into that world, I met with the CEO of Accenture Australia, New Zealand, and another person, and they went to an offer that I simply couldn't refuse, and went in and helped establish a national security and public safety focused practice area as a managing director. So I was back dealing with the people that I knew, the intelligence agencies and some law enforcement, etc. And it helped me a lot. I learned a lot about the private sector, but I missed the purpose that I had. And so I was asked by a wonderful friend of mine who is former Australian Federal Police Commissioner and now CEO of Red Cross Australia, Andrew Colvin, to take over as the Fortem Australia Advisory Board Chair from him. And I jumped at the opportunity because that gave me some purpose, trying to help in some form or fashion first responders who were experiencing all sorts of things, including, what I was going through. And so, I did that role for quite a while, and then ultimately, late last year, was approached and went through a process and became the CEO of Fortem Australia. Which is, it's not my forever job, but for the time being, until I work out what I'm going to do when I grow up, actually,
do we ever know?
Yeah, probably not. But I want to do my best to make it the organisation that it should be and is and has the potential to be. And then, as a custodian of a really important role, I'll hand it on to somebody else. So
sounds like such a journey, one that, as you said, has been so hard and had its ups and downs, and as you said, you've ridden through all of it, and you've also done the work, though, I think, which is really important to note, that you felt all these things, but you went and sought help and you got the support that you needed in order to get through that time.
Yeah, look, it's not without a lot of occasions sitting there at home by myself thinking, how did I get here? My God, sometimes how do you get out of bed and go and face the world when you go, wow, there were other things that occurred. I was sucked into a very high profile public inquiry for Special Commission of Inquiry for over 12 months, and gave evidence 6 times. And whilst I was that was a very challenging time for a range of reasons, and I'll just leave it at that. I think that commission of inquiry that I was involved in, the way it was conducted, I think most people could see the pros and cons of it. I'll just put it that way. But it was emotionally draining in many ways, and very difficult as well. So. All these sort of things accumulate. But one thing that I have learned is, you need your network around you. You need to throw your hand up when you feel that you need support, and all of that, and experiencing all of those things builds resilience. And resilience is innate to a human being, but it's vitally important that you develop the skills to deal with tough times and move through them. And a lot of people say you grow stronger through adversity and those things. I do believe that, but it doesn't make it any easier when you're going through it.
No, and you often can't see it while you're going through it. It's normally in hindsight or when you turn up to
Yeah,
another experience and you feel you're turning up stronger rather than waking up each day and you're like, oh yeah, I feel stronger. It's not really a mindset
that's
you
right.
wake up with. But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have two questions before we go to our hindsight questions. And as listeners know, we don't know where we're going to end up with this because I always say two and I might have 100 more. But the first one that came to mind, I mean, we're talking about obviously identity and purpose and how working in the police force really gave you that. And then when you were going through a really hard time, you did mention how you just continued to turn up. And while I love this, I think we all need something within us each day to turn up and that purpose to get us out of bed and to keep us going. And so
Mhm.
when that idea of not being part of the police force or not being in that job and dealing with controversy each and every day and waking up and feeling like this is it, like this is everything's been stripped of me. What kept you going? What helped you to get up every day? What was that purpose to get you out of bed and to face the day, even though you knew that day was potentially going to be one of the worst days of your life in the environment that you were currently in?
I had some really dark times. Not often, but a lot of dark times early on. A lot of anxiety, a lot of what's going to happen. Um, what got me out of bed? I didn't think I had a choice because I come from that
Why?
background. Well, I come from that background, right or wrong, where um, country boy, growing up come from an environment where whilst I had and have a loving family and all that sort of stuff, we weren't well off, we those sorts of things, and I've always sort of had this drive to take advantage of opportunities that have come my way because my parents didn't have the opportunities that I eventually had, and I felt I'm a provider at heart, and I felt that I had to a responsibility to get up every day and do the best I could to find my identity again and a role that could continue to provide for my family. Now that's very basic, hey, but that's innate. That's innately what it was about. Like, um, yeah, it's deep in me about being able to provide and probably make up for the times that I wasn't emotionally available. All those things were going around in my head, and that was where reaching out and getting help from professional people was excellent because they were able to rationalize those feelings for me. And one thing I remember my CEO coach saying to me constantly was, one thing you don't have, Mick, is patience. Because I wanted to land the next role straight away and get on with life, and all those things. And that was all about being responsible for other human beings and being a provider for my family. And it was also a bit of pride too, because I felt embarrassed about what had happened to me. Even though I and I categorically say this, no fault of my own. In fact, how do you go from being the preferred applicant from a top panel of six, incredible public servants and others to being selected for the police commissioner's role to being unemployed? Like straight away, wow. It's even now looking back, it's like, my God, how
Mm,
does that happen? But in saying all that, I was embarrassed about it too.
mm,
And so, I had no choice to get out and just confront it. And I had people saying to me too, and this is without a word of a lie, people inside the police force, people outside police force, in other areas of the public sector saying, Mick, there are people out there who actually need you to do things and to pick yourself up and keep going. And that really impacted a lot of me. And the other thing that I'll mention is that I looked around I could have taken a path of coming out and speaking publicly and being angry and all those things. Putting politics aside, I looked at Julia Gillard of all people and thought, wow, what a dignified way that she handled herself after the disappointment of losing the prime ministership. And I thought that her stature grew post politics by being dignified. And so I always thought of that. And it's only recently that I've started to share what happened to me, because I believe that there are lessons to be learned from all sorts of by all sorts of people from what I went through at that particular period of time. And I hope that people take those lessons and when the inevitable happens to them in some ways, they're able to deal with it much better than I did.
I think you did a pretty good job considering the circumstances you're in. So, that final question before we jump into the hindsight questions, I really want to touch on your takeaways from your experience. If we can narrow it down to two, that would be amazing. But if not, I can completely understand considering the journey has been so long. But two things that you think you've really learnt from your experience that have shaped who you are today and how you've turned up today, considering what you've learnt from what you've been through.
Okay, a couple of things. The first one is I've learnt that it's inevitable that things happen to people that are confronting, and it's hard. Life is tough, and everyone goes through ups and downs. Some of them are public ups and downs for some people, some of them aren't. But I've learnt that it's all pretty relative. I look at people who have lost loved ones and lost children and experienced all sorts of tragic events. And I think, wow, what am I worried about compared to, what other people go through? So, going through trauma and hard things is inevitable. But underpinning all of that, being resilient is critical, and being able to work through it and deal with it is critical. The second thing is the obvious, and that is, it is strong to throw your hand up and get help. No one can work through those things that I just mentioned without, having either friends to rely on, a strong network of people, or professional help in dealing with some of those things. Particularly for first responders, it is absolutely a sign of strength to throw your hand up and get help, because it provides you with another tool, or a strong tool, to deal with the inevitable things that you're going to face moving forward. And so, those two things, and I'm trying to encompass, family and loved ones into all that help space there, are pretty important lessons that I learned.
I think it is, and it's important, I think, to note, no matter where people are as well, that it's not just about handling it in crisis. It's that whole prevention as well, that, you don't need to go see someone once you're in the heaviness of it and you feel like you've got no other option. Put it part of a practice to see someone monthly, weekly, whatever you need, so that you're preventing a period where something does come up and then you have to see someone.
Absolutely. That builds the resilience within you.
Yeah.
And so, so when you do confront something which is tough, you've got at least, some skills, or at least you've got a level of resilience to work through it, and you can work through it. So I think it's absolutely critical, and I think leaders need to throw their hand up much more often than they do.
And be more open about what they're going through, because, as I said, in hearing your story and as we've spoken previously, it's so humbling and nice to know that even the people that we look up to, and as you said, there's that trust built, and you want to depend on them, but you're human as well, and
Absolutely.
you have challenges, and you sometimes have no idea what you're doing, and hearing that is refreshing to people that are looking up to you as leaders, because I think we're all navigating this life the best that we can.
Okay.
Alrighty, let's jump to the hindsight questions. So basically, these are questions that I have gathered, written down over last year's season because I get so invested in the story and I'd forget to ask people really cool questions that I'd come up with later. And I'm like, I should write these down. And so here they are, written down in this beautiful
Oh,
Ziploc bag. Nothing too special, but I'll pull out the first one and we'll see what we are running with. Alrighty. So, question number one. What have you learnt from your younger self that you weren't aware of now?
wow. Well, it's funny, and I won't labour on, but I've in the last couple of years since policing, I've taken up golf again. I used to play as a kid and play golf a lot competitively and those sort of things. And I recently, the last couple of years, have taken it up again, and I absolutely love it. And it feels the same as I did when I was a kid to
Mm,
play. That feeling is really important, and so I guess I've learnt that some of the things that occur to you and you experience in your formative years never leave you. They might sort of sit within you, and you don't feel the same way, or you don't sort of awaken those feelings until later in life. But they're so innately part of you. And
mm.
so yeah, this golf thing, I absolutely love it
That's
because
amazing.
I actually feel exactly the same way when I was 15 years old.
Oh,
That
we've all got our
so
little kids inside of us. I think once we
yeah.
just mature, we get more responsibility, life gets a bit more serious, and then we tap into that seriousness, thinking we've got to wear all these hats and be these sorts of people. But underneath it all, we're just little kids that want to have play and have fun and enjoy life.
And we are literally, connected back to our formative years
Mm,
and those experiences. Yeah.
mm. Sometimes we just shut down those sides of ourselves, but it's awesome that you're able to get back into something that gives you almost that sacred garden of what is, fills up that cup of yours outside of your purpose, your family. I think we all have
Yeah.
these little categories that we need to fill up, and when we neglect some of them, that's when sometimes we see little issues pop up.
Very true.
Okay, now, second question. Oh, I've had this question before, so I'm interested to see what your answer is. If happiness had an example, what would it be, and how would you explain it to someone with an example of you experiencing it thus far?
Wow. So
If you
happiness,
haven't already known, I am a deep thinker. So if
and
you,
really,
so if happiness was an example in your life, when have you experienced, and what is that example?
um, wow. I think happiness, like I've always known inside when I'm deeply happy. You can feel it, like that sort of lift that you get, that sort of euphoria almost that you get. So I think there's a couple of different examples. One is times two, and that was when my daughters were born. Like just pure joy and happiness. Yeah, the innocent, what you and your partner have created. So my daughters and their when they were born was a period of extreme happiness for me.
Mm,
Um, professionally, um, promotions and things like that. Yeah, happy, but not deeply, not to that, nothing like that. It's probably more
Can I ask,
professionally.
sorry, just quickly, the difference then? You say it's you experience that, but then not to that extent. What is that extent?
Because that euphoric feeling, for me, um, I never felt that, whilst when I achieved something in policing. Like it
Mm,
was great, don't get me wrong, it was, happy, but not that euphoric, wow, this is life-changing,
Mm,
amazing thing, that came from, events like the birth of my kids.
mm,
Um, so there was a difference there, but, so being promoted and those, various times in my career, yes, was good. But, I felt euphoric. No, sorry. I felt more happiness when achieving something within policing that I didn't think I could achieve. Now, and say by example, and without going on forever, but myself and Andrew Colvin, who was the National Bushfire Recovery Agency head, and I was the state equivalent in New South Wales, state recovery coordinator. We we both were confronted with a situation where small businesses were collapsing across, certainly southeastern New South Wales, and the grant scheme for disaster payments wasn't working. And him and I had many conversations about the need to convince governments, federal and state, to change it. And you know what? We went away and we did it. We worked hard and lobbied and got case studies and information. And both of us, to receive a call from Andrew going, "Hey, I've just come from the Prime Minister's office. They're going to change the scheme to be able to, provide $10,000 cash grants to businesses, to keep them afloat." It was like, wow, it's one of the best things I've ever achieved in my life.
mm.
That meant more to me than being promoted in some ways. Watching people that I really admire and care for, and who I've mentored and things, really achieve and keep goals is equally as important to me. So, I'm happy in various contexts, but there's no deeper happiness when it comes to love, and the love for your kids and that sort of stuff overrides everything.
Beautiful. This has been an absolutely phenomenal conversation with you, understanding your story and your insights. I do have one more question
Thank
though.
you, Richard.
I am so sorry to keep you even more.
No, 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 no.
It's it is has been playing on my mind, and I am interested, I guess, to get your insights on it, because you did talk about, almost a fractured system once COVID came about. And I know I am jumping from such a happiness spiel to jumping in just a little bit at the end, but I am curious around the aspect of, yeah, we talked about having a fractured almost trust in the police and government
Mm,
systems during
mm,
COVID. Do you
mm.
believe it has been mended since? And if not, are we able to fix that system? Because I think there is
Great
currently in the
question.
media and in the community, there is still quite a distrust with the force.
I, I, I totally, I don't think it's been amended, I should say. I think that, the inevitability of time makes feelings dissipate in some ways and those sorts of things, and people just roll on. I think that it gets down to, with policing, and I'll talk about government a little bit different, but policing, it gets down to strong, visible leadership, and instilling confidence in the community through that authentic leadership, and that's inevitable. It inevitably, I should say, comes from public speaking and being public and being able to instill confidence in the community. I think there's a long way to go with that. I think that, as I said all along, as I said, sorry, when we were talking about trust, I think, trust is fragile, and you've got to constantly work at it. Every time that there is something occurs where police are seen to have done the wrong thing, or there's some sort of controversial thing in the media, that chips away at that trust. But I fundamentally believe that that the community has a lot of respect and supports our first responders and police officers in particular. But they've got to be well led. They've got to be supported from at every level, and they've got to have the resources and backing of governments and police leadership to be able to do their jobs properly. And I think that there's policing in particular is facing a lot of crises around the world, not the least being attracting and retaining the right people. I think there's a lot of work to be done in that space. and that's all part and parcel of maintaining trust and legitimacy in the community.
So
In
important.
terms of government, in terms of government, you look at the events that have occurred in America and some of the political narrative that has evolved certainly in the last sort of 8 years or so in America, and the way that some of that narrative plays out in Australia and those things. I think Australians in particular are looking for authentic political leaders and leaders who can stand up and admit when they've got something wrong. I think Australians are sick to death of the spin sometimes, and I think that there's a lot of work to be done to ensure that our political system stays the way it is, with authentic leaders who have life experiences that they can bring to the table, and do things for the right reasons, rather than what polling tells them to do. And I think we're missing conviction politics in many ways, and putting issues that are really important to the community to take it or leave it. And I think that there's a lot of work to be done in that space.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I think your insights, and as I said, this space, we've all got to do work. I think there's no area where we can point the finger or blame people. We're all in an environment where we have to do the work, and trust is something that you work at. And I thank you for sharing that, and also dedicating a lot of your life to being the best leader that you thought you could be during that time. And I think it's obviously done
Thank you.
wonders for yourself and the community.
Thank you, Ashley. It's an absolute privilege.
I've been very grateful to have you on today, Mick, and share all of your insights and your knowledge and your story. So thank you once again. And thank you as well to everyone else out there for joining us for another episode of the Secret Sunday Session. We'll catch you guys all very soon.